Going to get us started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited for our conversation about mutual reciprocity and equity as a catalyst for community transformation today. And we will get into that topic very soon. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as I welcome you all and share a little bit of orientation about this webinar series. I'm Kaylin O'Connor from the Center for the Study of Social Policy. We jointly convene these webinars each month along with our partners at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. It is an open invitation for anyone who is using the Protective Factors Framework, coordinating strengthening families efforts, or just interested. And we have topics and guest speakers each month that are coordinated by CSSP and the Alliance, and we always welcome volunteers and suggestions. We do record the webinar each time, and we share the recording and the slides and any handouts and materials. They are all gathered at a wonderful archive that's maintained by the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. The videos are also on our CSSP's YouTube site or channel, whatever it's called. So you can find the videos there, but if you also want the slides and other handouts, go to that CTF Alliance page, and you can always find them there if you missed one or want to go back and see something. So as I said, we do this each month. It's always on the second Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock Eastern. Coming up on June 9th, we will be hearing from Kara Georgi and Chloe Corian from the CTF Alliance about the discussion guide that they developed for What Happened to You, the book by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It'll be an interesting conversation about how they developed that guide, how you can use it, and hopefully we'll get to hear a little bit about their brushes with celebrity in the process of developing that guide. We will also have the webinars on July 14th, August 11th, and September 8th, so go ahead and mark your calendars. And if it's a topic you're not interested in, you can open up that hour on your calendar, but otherwise you'll have it there, be ready to register when the topics are announced. All right, so today I'm so excited to be joined by two colleagues from the Be Strong Families organization, Alexandra James-Okochi and Ahmad. I'm gonna say Ahmad, I don't wanna say it wrong. They shared how to pronounce it and now my mind went blank. So I apologize for that. Two of our esteemed colleagues from Be Strong Families who are going to lead us in a really interesting conversation about mutual reciprocity and equity. And then we'll have, as usual, brief updates, and I apologize, I forgot to update this slide. We'll have updates from the Alliance, from Gretchen Test, and then I will share some updates from CSSP. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Alexandra and Ahmad, and I'm excited to join the conversation.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Kaylin and the whole team for inviting us. It's an honor and a privilege for us to be here with you today. And Ahmad and I are just going to share some work that we've been doing, some stories, some ideas that we think can be very impactful based on not only our experience with the work that we do within Be Strong Families, but also our previous works experience throughout our career. So thank you again, Kaylin and CSSP team for the invitations as well as the Alliance. And so we want to make sure that we do want this to be conversational. We're not going to lecture. We're going to share some concepts. We want you to write in the chat. And in order to do that, we always like to have some space agreements. So we make sure that this is a safe and brave space and that there's some mutual learning and understanding that happens. So we want to speak from our own experience and use I statements. Of course, we're going to treat everyone the way we want to be treated. And we ask that you bring your full presence. And of course, if you need a minute, because we're all adults, take a minute and just join back in with us. And so I'll let Ahmad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with everyone, especially for this kind of conversation. So my name is Ahmad Abojaradeh. I go by they, them pronouns. I've been doing this work professionally for a little over 10 years across various organizations and like 24 countries. But really where I'm kind of coming from for today's conversation, really in all the conversations that I'm a part of, is really through my lived experience. So I'm an indigenous Palestinian, so I'm a displaced individual, I am disabled, I am trans, I'm queer, I am Muslim, I'm not a US citizen. And so I really bring in the experiences of living as part of all of those different communities. And especially with a conversation like today, I didn't learn about mutuality and mutual reciprocity, and even equity from education, right? I learned it by living it every single day, both as a marginalized individual and through seeing the care and the systems of support that exist within marginalized communities. So that's really what I'm bringing forward here to the table.
And I am Alexandra James-Okochi. I have been the Chief Program Officer for Be Strong Families for a little over 2 years. Before that, I was the CEO of a social enterprise nonprofit in Richmond, Virginia. We were a national demonstration pilot for Casey Family Programs around our work we did with youth transitioning out of the child welfare system. We also particularly worked in Black and Brown community within the Richmond metro area, doing fatherhood work, parenting, urban gardening, economic empowerment for families, et cetera. And then before that, the majority of my career was at Fairfax County government outside of Washington, D.C., where I had several roles, from being a regional manager for 2 of their regions, and then a community center director. So I have done this work within communities since I was probably about 18 years old. Again, particularly in Black and Brown communities. And so I bring that, and I also bring my lived experience as a African-American woman who is now married to a Igbo Nigerian man. And so there's some conversations and some understanding also that I bring about African people, whether they're on the continent or whether they're in the diaspora or here in America. And so again, it's like all of the experience, but then also my lived experience around what it means around being anti-racism, what does it mean to be equitable in the society, and I'm a student of history.
Awesome. So before we jump into today's conversation, we really want to honor that this is most likely not the first time you're jumping into this work. And so kind of want to just take a bit of a step back and go through a brief writing exercise with everyone. And you can either do this with a pen and paper, you can do it on your computer, you can do it wherever you want, but we'll be giving you about a minute for each of these questions. And what I usually recommend for individuals is, as you're writing, just keep your pen on the paper or just keep your hands on the keyboard. And for the duration of that time, just whatever comes to mind, just let it out. Right? If it's coming up now, just put it on that piece of paper, put it on that computer. And if you'd rather not do it as a writing exercise, just kind of take a step back, take some deep breaths, close your eyes, and just do it as a meditation. Just allow your mind to really visualize some of the answers for these questions. But again, whatever is coming up for you is wonderful, right? It's just anything that comes up, and I'll tell you when to move to the next question. So I'll just give you a few more seconds just to get situated. If you want to get more comfortable wherever you are, get somewhere where you can kind of write, if you want to do it that way. And afterwards, we'll ask if anyone is comfortable sharing anything in the chat. You're welcome to share everything or anything, but feel free as you're writing this to just write it for you, right? You don't have to share it with everyone else. It's really meant for grounding for all of us and for each of us individually. So I'm going to set a timer. That way we have like a minute for each of these questions. All right. So the first question is, what does mutuality mean to you? And if at any point in any of these questions you're like, this word doesn't make sense, cool. Talk about why it doesn't make sense. Talk about other words that you may have used. Whatever is really coming up to mind. And again, just continue writing for that entire minute, even after you've answered the question. All right, and we can move to the next question of what are you looking forward to transforming today? Be as specific as you can be. Again, you have a full minute to write different things. All right, and the last question is, where do you feel supported and by whom? And if you have time, feel free to talk about what that support looks like. Why is it that that support in particular is the right support for you? Feel free to name as much as you possibly can in the next minute. All right, awesome. So feel free to take the next few seconds, just kind of wrap up anything that you've been writing. Feel free to add things in the comments. And for the next 30 seconds, minute or so, I'm going to actually pass it off to Kaylin to read some of your incredible responses that you all put in the chat. I've been reading some of them, and y'all are just incredible.
I agree. So I'll just read off a few of the things that have been typed in. I know others are writing where they're not sharing, but I'll read off some of these. Mutuality to me means agreed upon like-minded subject matters or goals, also teamwork. Mutuality means being on the same respectful page to transform people I know. And she was answering all three questions. I feel supported by my coworkers and my family at work and in my home. Looking for others to create community, to feel supported. We're not alone, but maybe isolated. And someone else wrote that mutuality looks like understanding without judgment. So I won't read them all, but lots of really good.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, really appreciate all of your responses. Everything you're all bringing forward is just incredible and just really grounds us in today's conversation. So the last thing I will mention around these questions is just keep in mind the responses that you've had, right? So this isn't the type of grounding exercise where you answer things and now it's gone forever. Really keep them in mind as we go through this session, because we will be going through all of these different things at different times. And so just hold on to them and keep them in mind as we go through here. So if we go to the next slide, just to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about today, and I think hopefully a lot of you read the objectives and the description, but we're really talking about mutual reciprocity and equity today. So having that basic understanding, talking about the history of mutual reciprocity and liberation work, both in the United States and around the world, and both Alex and I will share our experiences with various communities and specific types of professional experience around that. We'll be talking about the link between mutual reciprocity and equity, understanding how mutual reciprocity and equity are instrumental to community transformation, right? We want a destination as we're having all of these conversations, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll talk about some practical ways that you can walk away with today that you can hopefully be utilizing within your personal and professional lives moving forward. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to start us off with a definition of mutuality before handing it back to Alex. I always love to go into just definitions of certain words, just to continue that grounding, so that we're always on the same page, right? Along the way, we don't start losing meaning of what we're doing. And for me, the definition of mutuality is such a beautiful definition. And so in addition to everything that you all added in the chat, really for me, mutuality is about upholding that human truth that we are all in need of support and that we're all able to offer support, right? It has that back and forth component. It's not a matter of, well, I am the expert here, right? Alex is the expert here. And so the two of us are going to tell all of you everything, right? That's not mutual, right? Mutuality is we're actually going to be learning just as much as all of you are, right? We have certain things to bring to the table. You all have certain things to bring to the table. And it becomes this back and forth, beautiful relationship. And that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about mutuality. So keep that in mind as we go into the reciprocity piece, as we go into the equity piece, and as we go into the community transformation piece. So Alex, I'll pass it back to you.
So mutual reciprocity, you can stay on the same slide, Kaylin, is the practice of mutuality within the programs, communities, and how individuals interact. So it's a way of being, it's a way of showing up. It's the framework for how you interact within the communities that you serve. And if that becomes the foundation, that lens transforms how you implement programs, how you interact with community members, how you offer resources to community members. That becomes your framework of being. And it's something that has been around in communities already, right? Everyone's heard about mutual aid societies. Different groups here started those as a way to combine resources, actually came out of a need because there weren't services offered to these communities. And so instead of just waiting, they decide, what can we do to support one another? How can we lift each other up? And when that idea starts to happen, people, as you all know, do amazing things without a lot, which hopefully as we continue to evolve in this field, we'll start to see that all these amazing programs and amazing things are doing more with a lot versus doing more with a little and combining. And so really quick, I want to talk about how mutual reciprocity is shown up in communities of color, particularly in faith-based organizations. A lot of times we don't think about faith-based organizations, but particularly in the African-American church, there are whole programs centered around based on what the community needed that wasn't being provided or there was no access to. So where I previously worked at Trinity Family Life Center, it was actually started by a faith-based organization. And that was a part of the demonstration project with Casey, is how do you get faith-based organizations that are usually the center of the community thinking about what they can do and what they're already doing to assist with that disproportionate number of Black and brown youth in the child welfare system. The families are already there. And it's something, of course, everyone knows in the child welfare system, there's sometimes this hesitancy around, oh, I don't want to, separate church and state, et cetera. And so out of that project, we were asked by Casey to do a toolkit. It was with a mentor of mine, Leonard Gilbert, who used to work for the Ford Foundation, and then Peggy Uten, who works for the CEO for the Center for Nonprofit Excellence out of Robert Morris University. And we start looking at all faith-based organizations, Muslim, Islamic, spiritual, et cetera. And we found that the faith-based organizations that were really centered on doing their community work, they did not proselytize. Like, it wasn't even a part of what they were doing. They felt that this was a call. So that fear sometimes that we have in the nonprofit world and the government agencies to partner with faith-based is sometimes a misnomer, especially when you're looking at faith-based organizations that are already doing the work, whether it's feeding people, providing access for transportation, et cetera. And so that's a natural place where we've seen mutual reciprocity happen within communities. And then within African-American communities and nonprofits, this is not a newsflash to anyone, but usually they're the most under-resourced in philanthropy. And so because of that, there is a desire to continue to work. And the only way to continue to work is to bring the community in, to pool in everyone's brilliance, even who we in the nonprofit world in that old paradigm of, oh, we have to go save these people. That's not the mentality. The mentality is, what do we have? What does everyone bring to the table? And how can we serve each other? And so out of that, I've seen a lot of, even in my last job, the concept of economic engines, because we can't separate mutuality, reciprocity, and equity from economic empowerment. And so having programs that create entrepreneurial activities or ways to empower families gets to that funding piece, but also really looks at how the practice of mutual reciprocity works. And then making sure that when people are in need, and that their voice is there, they're heard, and then you're trying to make sure that you're transforming their life, not where they have to continue to be dependent on the programs and service. And that's a big thing. And it's a big, I know it's like, oh my gosh, how do we do that? But it's like when you have a group of people together and that is the focus, it's amazing how things start to align to be able to actually do that. And so, Ahmad, if you would share some of your work that you did in Connecticut, would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, and before I share about like the Connecticut specific work, just kind of almost want to take like a full step back history-wise, right, into like the very first human beings, right? If you really think about it, without mutual reciprocity, none of us would exist, right? It was just a survival thing. It's always been there. And that's why when you look at this list, right, and Alex talks about the African-American community and the faith-based communities, and here we have indigenous communities and BIPOC communities and queer and trans communities and all of these really marginalized communities. The reason that mutual reciprocity was never lost is because we still need each other for survival. Right. So I remember like when I was growing up in Arizona, the community that I was a part of was closely tied to like a Muslim community. And so having faith-based organizations and things like that, but also at the same time, it wasn't just Muslims accessing this space. As Palestinians, it was all Palestinians, right? So some of my best friends growing up are Christian Palestinians, but they were there at the mosque with us because the Muslim community still offered all of these things, right? Because it wasn't just one identity or another, right? And that's where that acceptance was. That's where people were seen as Palestinians and so on and so forth. And so I took a lot of that as I grew older. The first time I organized mutual reciprocity was actually at the age of 17. I was close to the Syrian border when the Syrian revolution started. And so overnight, you had a ton of individuals coming in, right, who were displaced because of the war. And it was so interesting being there at the time where I didn't even have to be the person to be like, oh, I know what to do. It was just the community knew what to do, right? The community immediately just showed up. It was like, nope, like these are our family, right? They weren't actually family, right? But like people are family. It's just that simple. So we're always there for one another in different ways. And so that was the first time I started organizing it. And so a few years ago, after getting into peer support, after getting into a lot of things that gave language to a lot of the things I've experienced throughout my life, I was like, I want to bring this to all the communities I'm a part of. And at the time I was living in Waterbury, Connecticut. And this was a couple years prior to the pandemic. And so I started wanting to do this work, and I would go and talk to like other people and organizations and town officials. And the initial response was like, oh, that sounds nice and also unnecessary. Like, let's focus on the real work, please. And then fast forward a couple of years, COVID-19 hits, right? And there were so many of us who knew how bad COVID was going to get, right? We were seeing it in terms of different conversations that were being had within nonprofits, within government agencies, within school systems. And you could almost map out like how disastrous it was going to be. And at the time, I was leading an organization. I was the executive director of an organization called Life in My Days. And we recognized that we were really not prepared for all of this, that our communities weren't prepared, that even with the existing networks that we had, it was nothing in comparison to what was about to happen. And so what we ended up doing is organizing a larger mutual reciprocity network across the state. We were supporting 90 different towns at the time, and we were investing into other individuals to build mutual reciprocity groups that are local to their towns. And so it was this way where everything was just built on that concept of mutual reciprocity of we're supporting you, and then you're taking on this work and doing it, right? So that now we don't have to, and we can focus on this other town that doesn't have anyone to do it, and so on and so forth. And it became this really beautiful collective of different individuals. At one point, it was like 700 volunteers from like the statewide level, and then you had volunteers on every single one of these smaller groups. And we were collectively supporting over 30,000 people a week, just supporting individuals with basic needs, because unfortunately that wasn't necessarily happening on every level. I will say, and this is why today's conversation is so important, is that despite all of that work, right? And on paper, that sounds incredible. And I had basically a budget of like $10,000, y'all, to begin with. Like, so basically no funding. Along the way was able to leverage more and more funding into the groups, right? But we already knew how, right? We had the know-how, we had the expertise, we just lived what our communities have always lived. But I will say that with severe inequity, right? And this is how we bring the equity piece into this conversation, that it wasn't sustainable, right? Because what ended up happening is you're supporting 30,000 people, but everyone who's supporting is from usually the most marginalized communities, right? And there's severe inequity across the board in terms of access to almost anything. And so at some point, you have less and less and less building into the system, right? Which is ideally mutual reciprocity is meant to build more and more resources, right? But if you're coming into it from a place of inequity without additional investment, right, without dealing with the severe inequity, at some point it starts getting less and less and less. And that's why for me, today's conversation is so critical, because we have to bring the two together.
Definitely. And I think about the historical aspect that you brought up. I mean, any movement that African Americans have started in this country responding to systems of oppression have also used mutuality because out of necessity. You know, all of the moving, the Voting Rights, Civil Rights Act, Black liberation movements, all of those movements came out of having to do something. But like you said, when the investment isn't there, there's always this catch up. So we can go to the next slide, Caitlin. And so of course, there are like lots and lots of definitions for equity and lots of ideas, et cetera. So just so we have a mutual understanding, we view equity as the mindful and intentional treatment and practices that address existence and impact systematic barriers that prevent individuals from accessing services, spaces, and pathways, impeding their chances of becoming everything they are meant to be. And so just kind of wanted to start with that because there are like a lot of different definitions around equity. And for us, equity it's normalized. And when Ahmad and Ahmed and us have this conversation, you know, if you are practicing mutual reciprocity, equity is already there. Because by virtue of the foundation and the framework of it, it's already there. So it's inherent, mutuality and mutual reciprocity, if that is the foundation of practices and policies and programs. And it's just both of them are a tool and a pathway. The end game is transformation and liberation. That's the destination that sometimes I see is left out of these questions. Like, I'm very excited about what's been happening in the last 2 years and the conversations that we're having, but it has to go from this level of conversation and stances by organizations internally and externally to how then do we as an organization, as an individual, help transform this system. And of course, we know, right, change is incremental, change happens over time. But if we are taking it from a theoretical level and a talking level into a practice level, then it'll be amazing to see what happens as the years go by. And so the other thing that we wanted to bring up is that equity and mutual reciprocity, they're interdependent, right? They're aligned, and of course they should be practiced simultaneously. And when they are, they help to dismantle systems of pressure, because that is really what this equity work is about, whether it's racial equity, whether it's equity for the LGBTQIA community, equity for access, whatever kind of equity that we're talking about. It's about dismantling these systems of oppression so that people have access to be full human beings, to be able to manifest the things that they want without the constant stress. And we talk about this a lot, you know, for communities of color, there's a constant stress level that's under, because you're always maneuvering around and over and through and on the outskirts to get the things that really should be a part of your basic humanity. And sometimes they're overt and sometimes they're like subtle every single day. I'm going to stop and see if Ahmed wants to add something here.
Yeah, just absolutely to all of that. And so just in summary, for us, right, if you're saying that you're doing equity, but there's no components of any mutual reciprocity or that mutuality in there, to me, it's not equity, right? To us, it's not equity. And vice versa, right? If we're doing mutual reciprocity work, but there's actually zero equity in there, then it's not true, authentic mutual reciprocity. And I think we've all probably been in spaces where certain words will be used, right? Like, I've been in spaces where people will be like, yes, we are an equitable organization. And I'm like, and what does that mean to you? And they're like, well, we had a 101, right? Equity means something, mutuality means something, mutual reciprocity means something. And that's why we really wanted to start with a lot of those definitions and that end goal, right? If our work is not leading to liberation, then there's something missing, right? So if I go around saying I do equity work, but none of it is moving us anywhere close to liberation, then to me, that's not equity work anymore, right? We want that end goal. We're heading towards something. Yeah, so if we can go to the next slide.
So transforming communities, what does that really look like? And so this is, you know, our vision. Again, everyone has different vision, but this is our vision based on our lived experience, is that we want communities where people are seen, they're honored, and have everything they need to succeed in their own ways. We want equitable communities. We want and need communities built on mutuality, building mutual reciprocity and equity into our foundations that move us towards transformation. So what is the elements of community transformation? Now, we know that it's a pathway, right? All of us who've been doing this work, you know, it's individual, it's families, but families are the basic building block of communities. So it's all the same trajectory. And of course, you know, we all have had talked about these conversations. A lot of times about parent voice, but the same thing applies when you're doing parenting work and having parent voice is the same thing with communities. Because if you're just talking to parents and not doing anything about the community, we're spinning wheels. And it doesn't mean that your particular program or nonprofit has to say, oh, I'm going to save the world. But that's why we should be using partnerships and et cetera to see how we can do that. And a lot of times, unfortunately, you know, there's this, again, this is something that's not equitable and it's not about mutual reciprocity. Nonprofits and organizations are pit against each other for funding. Right now, we've seen a change because of collective impact, and sometimes now in these grant proposals, you know, people are saying, "Hey, you have to have partners." So people are being forced to do it, which is a good thing. but it should be something that should be natural, because there's nothing that one organization can do on their own, right? It has to be, again, some level of mutual reciprocity, which is also why I'm a big proponent, and you'll see in this third bullet, of including economic empowerment and economic engines. At my previous position that I shared with you, 85% of our budget we raise ourselves, which means we weren't dependent on grants and contracts in order to do the work. When the money ended, we were able to still continue to do the work because we had an economic engine. I really think that is the next level for the future for the nonprofit world. And then that allows you to be able to hold your integrity as an organization and say, hey, this is the work that we feel strongly about, and this is what we're going to use the money that we've been raising through our economic engines to continue it. Authentic voice is present before decision-making, right? A lot of times we're like, oh, let's have to bring the parent voice and the youth voice and et cetera. But it's usually like after everything is already created. It's after everything. So it becomes kind of this, I saw someone say, yeah, something about the performative and the shallow, right? That can be, even with the best intentions, seem as performative, because you haven't actually talked to whoever you're serving before you made decisions. Another thing about authentic voice being present before decision making, it's not just, hey, what do you need? How can we help serve you? What are the things you would like to see in your community? It's also making sure that they're at the table within the decision making of your organization. Do you have parent and community representation on your board of directors? When you're utilizing parents and community members, are you paying them and valuing their time the same way you value staff time? Are you making sure that your programs and your services can be accessed around the barriers that parents and community members may have in order to show up and actually fully participate? Also, it's inclusive networks, right? Having networks of community and staff with the staff in a supporting role. Really shifting from, which is a part of historical systematic oppression, shifting from this paradigm that people need saving and that we in the nonprofit world are their saviors. That mentality can't coexist with equity and mutuality and mutual reciprocity, because it just can't. Because if I'm honoring you as another human being, and I honor you to say that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you have what you need, and I learn from you, and that I am also getting what I need. And I think that's one of the things sometimes when we're in nonprofits, we don't realize that we are getting something need. We may say, oh, we're serving the community, and so this is what we do, and it's so great. But you're also, it's a privilege to be able to serve. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to help. So that is sometimes what we get. And then we get the lessons, we get the understanding from the parents and from the community members of how to make what we're doing better. But if they're never at the table to hear, you never hear that, and you just make assumptions, then you never get to have these comprehensive programs that actually address what the barriers are for the community. Also, again, there's the idea that staff are separate from the community. It doesn't matter your race, your identity, et cetera. If you're in this role where you're working with the community, you have to see yourself as a community. You have to make sure that you're not operating in that power dynamic. One of the things, which is why those who are familiar with Be Strong Families, why I love Be Strong Families so much, is the parent cafes, because it disrupts that power dynamic. And I've seen it happen. I was doing cafes in my previous work before I joined Be Strong Families, and I've seen the head of Virginia, the commissioner for human services, be with a parent whose child welfare involved, and really the light bulb comes on because they have to show up as a parent. Like, oh my gosh, I learned something from this parent about parenting. And oh, wow, we have similar things that's happening with our teenagers. But if those spaces aren't created to see each other's humanity, it's always this power over thing. So staff seeing themselves as community members. And then last but not least, community members are staff. So if you hiring, not just, okay, we have this parent group and they're on our board of directors, and we have this parent group that we ask to advise us and give us input, and maybe they volunteer in our programs, but that you're actually hiring from within the community. And I'm going to speak specifically as an African-American woman, because of the way our communities are with poverty and blight. One of the things that was super exciting about where the work that was done at Trinity is that we intentionally hired in the restaurant, in the gym, in the childcare center, people from our community and people who we serve, the fathers who were formerly incarcerated, the young lady who had been in the child welfare system. And we did the work, which a lot of times people don't want to do the work of making sure that they feel welcomed and build their capacity. They already will come with capacity, but if you're really going to do this work, you have to do that. And then you have to be, staff has to understand that when you are working within the community and you're serious, there are going to be glitches. So how do you deal with that glitches? So I'll give you an example. From the janitor all the way to the director, we were intentional about this mix of lived experience, quote unquote professionals. And the janitor had issues. He had, things that he was going through and being pulled over by the police for this and that and that. And I could have easily said, you know what, you have to go. But how can I go into the Richmond City Jail every day and serve? Or how can I go do this parenting program in Henrico drug support? And my own staff, I can't build their capacity and use the same resources. Now, of course, it's not an infinite amount of grace because we still have to run an organization, but making sure that we try and give that effort to say, okay, how can I help you work through these issues? Because these are the same issues that we say we want to help in the community, but somehow when we hire, we don't want to have the patience and to grow and develop staff. Development and enhancement are not just for the professionals. Those are for the people who would honestly be the most valuable staff because of their lived experience. So having that patience and grace, and I've never had, in my 10 years that I was there, I never had an issue. Because I sat down with that mutual respect and mutual understanding, and we're going to support you and we're going to connect you to resources, I never had it go left, ever, because it's how you show up. And when people see that you're authentically there for them and you're doing it internally and externally, it's usually there's no issues. They actually rise to the occasion, which goes again to our expectations and our understanding. If you expect greatness from people and show it in your actions, they rise and come to the level of greatness. Ahmad?
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all, people are amazing. And so just honoring people, just give space for that amazing to be everywhere. I just wanted to make a quick comment on this list. Right, if you notice, it's almost like a step-by-step guide to really getting to that transformation, right? You have some of the smaller things. And so start from that top, right? And work your way down. But ultimately, your vision should be that your organization is just a part of the community. That separation does not exist. It's community members leading everything, right? And y'all, if you're worried about your job, there's so much that needs to be done. So much that needs to be done, right? And so us knowing when to step aside, how to invest in the community, empower the community until the community is literally able to just take it on, that's amazing, right? And I do that every day within my work, where I will go into communities, support short term, make sure that they have everything they need so that I don't have to be there, right? And that's really that transformation that we're talking about. So if we go to the next slide, we're just going to take a quick few minutes just to take another step back, right? And reflect on everything that we've been talking about. And just in everything you're all bringing to the table. So it's going to be similar to the first few questions. So take it as a writing exercise if that works for you. Take it as a meditation if that works for you. Whatever works best for you. And feel free to share things in the chat. And like last time, I'll ask the 3 different questions. again, just to take another step back, really soak in everything that we've been talking about and everything that you're bringing. So the first question is, where are mutuality and equity already showing up in your work or in your day-to-day personal life, if you'd like to answer it that way as well? All right, and the next question is, what are your current barriers to community transformation? So again, keeping in mind that definition that or that community transformation vision that we just offered, what are the barriers to doing all of that? All right, and I want to give you the longest time for this last question, hopefully, and feel free to continue even as we're kind of debriefing around all of this. What are possible solutions to the barriers you identified? And as we wrap up, please feel free to, or wrap up this reflection, feel free to add, feel free to share different things in the chat if that works for you. I'm seeing something from Maria saying, as part of my community and work, being sensitive to others' needs and how my point of view can support them. Absolutely, that's awesome.
And I would say, I'm sure the slides will be available. Take these questions to your colleagues and have a conversation about it in, within the specificity of the work that you're doing, and see what happens. See what type of brilliant things manifest about solutions once you've talked about the barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely let these sit with you. And continue going back to them, right? So the barriers that you identify today are going to be so different than a month from now because you're going to be different. Hopefully the people you're talking to are also different, right? And you're going on and on. See another comment, Maria says, as part of my community, work as team without feeling superior, but looking for the real support for the community. Absolutely, I love all of that.
Yep, Lindsay says, mutuality and equity are already showing up in my work in the way that my program and myself personally approach families. Parents are the expert of their own child. We're really just walking beside, not ahead to parent. I love that. Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thanks for sharing, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. So like Alex said, definitely go back to these questions later and continue this conversation with your team. So if we go to the next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit about pathways for that community transformation and really just started off on the individual level, right? So I know often, even for me, right, when I go into a space, a lot of times I have to carry my role and title and organization, and it becomes entirely about that, right? But we're here to tell you that unless we do the individual work, whatever our organizations are doing, whatever our community are doing, it really won't get to where we need to go. And it's actually the opposite, right? When we get the individual right, when all of our team members get the individual right, we're able to start a foundation that's really healthy for the organization. And so just a few things to do. And some of you already mentioned some of these. And so we're talking about practicing mutuality everywhere, right? And we're talking about here everywhere, right? So if you have children, how do you practice mutuality there? If you have a partner, how do you practice mutuality there? Family members, random strangers at like the grocery store, right? Everywhere, right? How do you practice that mutuality? taking a step back and just listening to people, right? For us to truly honor people, we need to give people space, right? If I take up all the space, there's no space for people to be honored, for people to be fully present. And so really taking that step back and just listening to everything around us. We want to recognize where we should be and where we should not be. And that's really just understanding our power, right? And so I mentioned earlier of like how I'll go and support a community and then I will leave, right? I know my place and I know where I shouldn't be, but I also know the amount of privilege I carry by being in that space in the first place, the amount of levers that I have. And so really recognizing that in your day-to-day life, right? Outside of your roles, what power do you have? And every single person has power. I was recently running another training and everyone's response to who has power was just white, cis, straight males. Y'all, we all have power. I, as a queer, trans, Muslim, indigenous Palestinian who's disabled, still have so much power, right? We all have power. So recognizing that and recognizing how we use that power makes such a huge difference. And we want to honor ourselves and our experiences, right? As like knowing when to step forward and when to take that step back. All of our experiences are valid. All of our experiences deserve space, but there is a time and place and method to sharing, right? I've gone through a lot of marginalization and oppression, but if a Black person is telling me about their oppression as a Black person, this is not my time to be like, let me tell you about Palestine, right? Like, no, I can take a step back and tomorrow they'll give me that space, right? And look beyond what's right in front of you. And lastly, this goes back to the third question from the very first exercise in terms of support. We all need support to do this work and to just do this work individually, right? As human beings, we need support and we don't have to be alone. And so finding those pathways makes such a huge difference. So,
and just adding when, you know, from the grounding exercise, like when you feel supported, right? And how and by who, you know, thinking about with this last statement that we do, right? We all had the conversations about vicarious trauma and resilience and et cetera. This is hard work. This is training work. This is self-awareness work. This is accountability. You see things that break your heart, you know, and so you have to have your own support systems to keep your individual power up and high, and then being able to release so you can then continue to serve and support. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So we want to talk a little bit about program practices, and we have only a couple of minutes left. Practice mutuality and equity in internal organizational practices, right? The HR policies and practices, the hiring practices. This is not new. Staff development and staff enhancement, pay equity and transparency, and then the co-creation of EDI or DEI efforts, right? Which means what I see or what I've heard from colleagues is like everyone after George Floyd was like, hey, we're gonna be equitable and anti-racist organization, all these great words, but it just becomes a statement. There was no conversation with the staff to say, how do we want to do this work? What does this work look like for us internally first? Because we all know, I'm sure everyone on here knows that, you know, we all perpetuate these systems regardless of race, identity, et cetera. And because we're all perpetuating and we all have to deprogram and rewire our minds. And so that has to happen internally for we show up in the world and make these big pronouncements. And so then also EDI is for the most marginalized versus for the most privileged. And right here, I know Ahmad is going to jump in with me. This is something that we talked about a lot, but from my perspective, what this is not making it so that the people of color in your organization have to constantly be the spokesperson. Yes, our lived experience is valuable. Yes, we want to be able to show up, but it's about the work happening together and individually and separately, and not that every person that's the marginalized person within your organization has to take on the burden of what the whole organization should be doing. And Ahmad, I'm going to stop because this is one of our conversations.
Yeah, I feel like I can talk for like 20 minutes on this, if not like 2 hours, but I will just share briefly, if you think about so much equity work, right? Even this presentation, right? It's with the assumption that it's usually the most privileged coming into this work, that are doing this work within our communities and our organizations. And it's not equity for the most marginalized, right? And I see this all the time, whether it's within organizations, whether it's within like job descriptions, right? I look at job descriptions all the time. I used to have a career in like career development back in college, way back in the day. And the amount of equity positions that will now require certifications, right? Which is like, okay, cool, that sounds nice on paper, but also like, I come into equity not because of a certification. It's because I knew what that was before I learned to talk, right? And so how do we structure everything so that it actually does cater to the most marginalized versus just the most privileged? And that means that conversations need to change, job descriptions change, right? Where all your questions should not be basically like, do you understand equity? Because it's like, if I step into a room and someone is like, do you understand trans equity, for example, and they are not trans, I will glare at them, y'all, right? Like, you can't tell me I don't understand equity within my identities, right? But there is no real space for that because it's assuming that me as a person who wants to, let's say, work with trans people, I'm going to be cis, right? Or me as a person who wants to work with Black people, I'm going to be white, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of what we're talking about there. And I'll pass it back to Alex.
Okay, and so you saw the community investment. I know we're running out of time. I want to honor the time and honor the space for Caitlin to give the updates. You can go to the next slide. One thing you're going to take home and one thing you're not ready to take home with you yet. So you can just put that in the chat.
And as you do that, if we go to the next slide, just want to share this quote really quick. If people don't know Polly Murray, you all definitely should. So Polly Murray is a queer Black woman that has done such incredible work. So I won't go on and on, but Polly has this incredible quote saying, "True community is based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. It affirms the richness of individual diversity as well as the common human ties that bind us together." And I thought Polly was like perfect to like wrap this up.
Thank you, everyone. Caitlin.
Thank you so much. This is just fantastic content, and I think it stimulated a lot of thought for a lot of participants. So thank you for all of that. I am trying to start my video. There we go. I'm going to hand off to Gretchen to share some updates from the Children's Trust Fund Alliance.
Thank you, Kaylin, and wow, thank you, Ahmad and Alexandra. That was an amazing session. I really learned a lot, so thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time, and for those of you that have to run, I'm putting some information in the chat. And if all else fails, just go to our website, ctfalliance.org, and you can get information on all of the things I'm just going to briefly mention. I'm sitting in for Maureen Holliker, our Director of Training, who is training today. So thank you for having me. I wanted to share that we have an upcoming train-the-trainer session. For those of you who are familiar with the Strengthening Families, Bringing the Protective Factors to Life in Your Work framework, we have a training and we have a training of trainers. And in August, there's going to be a training of trainers session. And for those of you who are not familiar with the certified trainer opportunity, there's a network that will, once you go through the training, you'll have access to all of the training materials, a closed Facebook group, regular office hours with Maureen, as well as regular meetings with the network. So it's a really wonderful opportunity. And we also offer the Strengthening Families training too. So please visit our website to get more information about those. Would you mind going to the next slide? Great, thank you. We also have, support the Birth Parent National Network, which is a network of parents who have experience with the child welfare system. And they host 4 webinars or 4 meetings a year, as well as a virtual convening. And so we wanted to highlight a couple of those that are coming up. We encourage you to participate or to share with anyone who might be interested. These are open to anyone, not just parents. And the BPNN, as we call it, is really hundreds of parents and organizations who are working together to support parents and build their voice in influencing policy and supporting each other around leadership. So the next, there are 2 events coming up, one in June, which is the virtual convening that they have every year, and it's featuring our own Kaylin O'Connor and Dr. Charlene Harper Brown talking about racism and anti-racism in the social ecology. And I have been lucky to participate or receive this session, and it's really an amazing and powerful discussion, and I really encourage you to check it out. This is, again, open to everyone, and both of the presenters use a lot of examples and quotes and stories to really illustrate some powerful concepts. So please join us for that. And then the next slide, that's June 23rd, sorry. And then just before that, actually next week, next Tuesday on the 17th, the Birth Parent National Network is having a webinar, Bringing Parent Voice to Policy and Practice. And this is going to be an opportunity for you to hear from the Washington State Parent Ally Committee. It's a group of parents the session will be led by Sharonda Selvanoff and a panel and they're going to talk about this organization, its origins, what its role is, what they do, and how they work to influence policy in Washington State. They have had some amazing results and impact, and they really want to share it and encourage others and support others to do the same work. So there will be time for discussion and asking questions on that webinar. And so again, we encourage you to join us there, and you'll just need to register through our website. And I think, did I put the, yes, and here are all of the links. So thank you, Kaylin, for giving us a chance to share.
Thanks so much, Gretchen. And I did put links in the chat as well, because I know we're hitting the end of our time and some people might have needed to jump off, but I will just quickly share our perspectives on early relational health video series. The 4th video has now been posted. We're developing some discussion guides so people can use them in staff meetings and other settings where you'd want to watch the 20-ish minute video and then have a conversation about it. So we'll get those up soon and hope you can use those to advance conversations about early relational health within your organizations and communities. We're hiring, so go check out our page, cssp.org, right under About, Job Opportunities. We've got some really great opportunities there at this point, and a couple more coming up soon, I think. And I just also wanted to make sure everyone's aware, next week we'll have a kickoff event, virtual kickoff event for the virtual Together for Families conference. So you can register to participate for an hour-long event next Thursday, where we will be giving a sneak preview of what's going to be happening at the conference. You'll get a chance to connect with other people who are going to be at the conference, really to kick off the networking and excitement about all of that. There will be some raffle prizes, and early bird registration will open while we're in that session. So I hope lots of you will join us, and of course, hope you'll join us for the conference in October. So those are all the updates I had to share. I went quickly, but I just love the content that Alexandra and Ahmad shared with us, and kind of the reflections that you led. I can tell from the chat, people got a lot out of it, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do that with us. So thanks for being great partners as always at Be Strong Families. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.